Hey, you guys have all been asking me to give my opinion and feedback on this egg research study that came out last week. So I've finally made time in my crazy calendar to do it. It's going to be a one-take thing, so let's just rock and roll. First things first. So JAMA put out this study that was shared pretty rapidly with the media last Friday that eggs could lower or shorten your life, basically. Eggs could kill you is what was being shared in the media. So the first thing that's really wild about this new study is that it was a collection, first off, of prior observational research studies. So no new information was gathered within this new study that JAMA put out. It was a 6 different cohorts, okay? And this is collecting data back from 1985 all the way up to 2016. And it was based on a food frequency questionnaire. You guys know, if you've listened to the Naturally Nourished podcast and my perspective on research, that anytime, first off, we're looking at an observational study, there is huge risk for error. And based on a food frequency, that there's the self-report halo effect that can interfere with individuals sharing their information and preconceived notions of what healthy is or what's being assessed. So they pulled this data from, again, 6 cohorts from 1985 all the way up to 2016, and it was about 30,000 people, but they collected one single food frequency questionnaire from each individual. One single. And that was supposed to reflect that individual's diet. I don't know about you, but depending on my week, depending on my day, even though my diet is generally high fat, low carb, even though my diet is generally high fat, low carb, my diet on Monday of last week might look very different from my diet on the Monday 3 weeks following, right? So not necessarily reflective of my year, not necessarily reflective of where my diet goes in 5 years or 10 years. So there were no updates or assessments with the individuals when they were looking at disease factors in those individuals, right? And again, it was a pooling of prior collected data to try to prove a correlation, right? So it's this whole connection of correlation is not causation. When we're looking at really a research study, we want to look at intervention-based studies to see the best influencing factors of outcomes. And so again, first off, it was observational. Second off, it was not observational of a collection of new information. It was outdated data that was pulled from prior already expressed studies and then manipulated to try to find the positioning of the research party and their shared information. So I throw that out with the trash, not to mention that the correlation that they identified was quite weak at best. Like I think it was 1.1 or something like that. Not having it. So what I think is super frustrating as a practitioner in the ketogenic world is that we're seeing more and more and more of this revving. But all I can think as far as the yin and the yang of the universe is that that means that something right is happening and that big pharma and big ag is scared. So they keep trying to find the data that will spook us away from eating diets that support optimal health, vitality, and reduce the need for medications. So I want to share with you a couple studies that have come out in the recent timestamp that have been very supportive, but yet hush-hush, not shared such expressively with the media. So there is one study in April of 2008 by the Journal of Obesity and Metabolism. And this was a randomized clinical trial. So it's an intervention-based study. First off, that already is going to have a lot more value. They had a population of 115 adults, so a pretty reasonably sizable population. All of them had type 2 diabetes, and they put them all on a hypocaloric or calorie-restricted diet, right? And they had a high-fat, low-carb tier and a high-carb, low-fat tier. Well, first off, which might not be surprising to you that have done keto, the population that did high fat, low carb, more people completed the clinical trial where there was more attrition or dropout in those that were doing the high carb, low fat, probably because they weren't satiated. They were damn hungry. So that's the first thing. It was sustainable to do the high fat, low carb. they saw that both populations had weight loss and both populations lowered blood pressure. And that probably was to do with the calorie restriction itself. And then they did see, though, favorable, only in the high fat, low carb, an increase of HDL, which we know to be cardioprotective. They also saw an increase of reduction of medications. So more people got off of their diabetic managing drugs in the low carb, high fat population. And A1C did come down in both populations, but the high fat, low carb got off of their medications while bringing their A1C down. So I see that as a huge win. The distribution of their macros were pretty close to a ketogenic diet. It was of their intake, 14% of their intake from carbs, 28% as protein, and then 58% as fat in the high fat, low carb. And then the high carb, low fat was 53% as carbohydrate, 17% as protein, and 30% as fat. So I think that was a pretty interesting finding. Again, that was April of 2018, and not many people talked about it. They also found conclusively that there was no risk factor for renal or kidney disease in the high fat, low carb diet. We often hear that misinformation that the keto diet is bad for your kidneys. So I thought that was really interesting too. Another study that came out recently, the name of the study is Lipid Levels Are Inversely Associated with Infectious and All-Cause Mortality. And this is a study that looked at the Netherlands, 37,000 people, and they found they were monitoring people for end-stage renal disease. They did find, of course, with end-stage renal disease, a 36-fold increase of cardiovascular incident. But they were monitoring these people over multiple years, and they were monitoring their lipids, okay? They didn't monitor diet, but I just want to make the point on the influence of cholesterol and how it may not be the right thing to chase in the first place. They did find that lipoproteins may protect against infectious disease. They saw an inverse relationship of mortality with cholesterol, total cholesterol, and LDL values. So basically, as your cholesterol and LDL stayed elevated, or the populations that had higher numbers had lower risk of death. Pretty wild and remarkable, and that was quite a large population, and it was a really strong, significant trend. So beyond good information out there that's looking at clinical trial and that's looking at lab values over time, and that's monitoring patient outcomes by intervention-based versus an observation study based on a single food frequency. And think about the food frequency element sidebar of like, okay, if you're collecting a food frequency from 1985 and in the 80s, everyone thought eggs were going to kill them, those people probably, modified their data as well. Anyway, so I love eggs. I will not be stopping eating them. I recommend, generally speaking, like 12 to 18 eggs a week. It's like a carton and a half, and we definitely go through that in our household. It's my favorite way to break intermittent fast with eggs and avocado and sprouts. Eggs have so much nutrient density. In the yolk of an egg, we get a very healthy amount of choline, and choline is a cousin to the B vitamin family. We see benefits for choline as far as pregnant mothers, supportive of reduction of risk of neural tube defect, and supportive of methylation, the process of building and excreting in the body. We know choline can help with memory and the conduction of the signals of our neurotransmitters. We see other B vitamins in our egg yolks like B12 and biotin that support our metabolism. We see beneficial compounds in egg yolks that include omega-3 fatty acids. We know that there are rich amounts of carotenoids, especially in those pasture-raised eggs. And we get vitamin D. So there's a lot of immune support, there's metabolic support, and there's neurological and antidepressant and anti-anxiety support, all found in that beautiful package of an egg. Not to mention dietary cholesterol, and cholesterol is an integral part of every cell membrane in our body. It's in the cell wall to protect our healthy components of our cells and keep the unhealthy stuff out. And cholesterol is necessary to build hormone in the body, sexual hormone, as well as cortisol for our stress response. So keep on egging on, eat your high-fat diet, and think about the what and the why and the who is funding your data before you make a dietary change.